Salam and peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase, and together we continue our journey into the language of reality. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field called phi, spelled Phi. Phi is the holophase, a cyclic rhythm defined at every point in the universe. Its first echoes give us three voices at once: time, which we call omega, spelled Omega, space, which we call k, and motion, which we call v, built from both omega and k. Above them, higher derivatives form a branching tree that, in principle, goes on forever. Every law of nature is a pattern in this tree of derivatives of phi. Today, we zoom into just one branch of that tree. In part 23, we stood under the Master Tree with a small flashlight in our hands. We asked a very honest question: how much of this infinite language can we actually read? We discovered that our experiments have limits of resolution, limits of noise, and limits of time. We can only see a few lower branches clearly. The higher, finer twigs are mostly in shadow. That part was abstract, but it was necessary. It told us where our knowledge truly comes from and where it must stop. Now, in part 24, we do something that feels almost the opposite. Instead of looking up at the unreachable canopy, we look around at our ordinary lives. We ask a very simple question: can I see phi in the light in my room, in the sounds I hear, in the solid things I touch, and even in the thoughts moving through my mind? This part is about reading daily life as holophase. It is about taking everything we have built so far, the tree, the derivatives, the nuts, the waves, the limits, and using it not just on blackboards or in labs, but in the world you inhabit right now. So, as you listen, I invite you to gently look around, or to remember places you know well. A window, a cup of tea, a friend's face, a song you love. We are going to walk through these scenes together and quietly translate them into the language of phi. Let us begin with light. If you are indoors, perhaps there is a lamp nearby, or daylight leaking through a curtain. If you are outside, perhaps the sun is on your face, or distant streetlights are glowing. To most of us, light feels mysterious. It just is. You flip a switch and the room becomes visible. You walk outside and everything is flooded with color. In holophase language, light is not a separate substance added on top of reality. It is one kind of organized vibration of phi. Think of phi as the underlying rhythm that everything shares. Light is what happens when that rhythm, at certain places, chooses to oscillate in a very fast, very clean wave. Earlier, when we talked about waves, we introduced two key pieces of the code: omega, the rate at which phi ticks in time, and k, the way phi twists across space. For a simple light wave, there is a very tight relationship between omega and k. That relationship is like a grammatical rule. Only certain pairs of omega and k are allowed to travel together as light. What we call color is, in this story, a way of labeling that relationship. Red light is phi vibrating with one kind of rhythm. Blue light is phi vibrating with a different kind. When you see a rainbow, you are watching a whole family of allowed phi patterns being separated by water droplets in the air. You do not need equations to check this. The falsifiable content appears when we ask, if light is really a phi pattern with a particular link between omega and k, what should happen when it passes through glass, or bounces off a mirror, or interferes with itself through a narrow slit? Those experiments give very precise predictions: where bright and dark fringes will appear, how much the beam will bend, how fast signals will travel. Over a century of tests have shown that light behaves exactly as such a phase pattern should. But for you, sitting here, I want to keep it much simpler. Look at the patch of light right now. Maybe on the wall, maybe on your hand. Imagine that, underneath what your eyes can see, there is a tiny invisible hand at each point. A phase hand, spinning round and round like the hand of a clock, except at a rate far beyond anything you can consciously feel. That spinning hand is phi in its light-like mode. The direction in which the peaks and troughs of this rhythm move through space is encoded in k. The speed at which the peaks move, how quickly the crests of brightness sweep across the room, comes from a combination of omega and k, which we called the motion echo V. Once you start to imagine this, everyday scenes change. When sunlight reflects off a window and makes dancing patterns on the ceiling, you're not just seeing light bouncing. You're watching the phase pattern of phi meet glass, obey a boundary rule, and change direction. When sunlight passes through a prism and splits into colors, you are seeing different phi rhythms separate because each one bends by a slightly different amount inside the glass. From the holophase point of view, all of this can be described without ever saying light is a thing that travels. Instead, we say, here, phi is speaking in a very fast, very coherent wave dialect. Our eyes are special detectors that respond to certain bands of omega and k. What we call blue or green is our brain's way of labeling different phi phrases. This is not poetry alone, it is testable. You can build detectors that respond only to certain ranges of frequency. You can measure how quickly information in a pulse of light actually arrives, which reveals the group velocity, the motion of the envelope of phi. You can send light through different materials and see how the phase pattern speeds up or slows down. All of these details match the behavior of an underlying phase field with the right grammar. Now let us turn from light to sound. While light is phi vibrating extremely fast in an electromagnetic mode, sound is phi showing up in a slower, more tangible way through the motion of matter. When you speak, air near your mouth is pushed and pulled. These pushes and pulls travel through the air as waves, regions of compression and rarefaction. To our ears, these waves feel like sound. In holophase language, you can picture sound as another kind of phrase written in the same field. This time, the patterns in phi are tied closely to the positions and velocities of air molecules. The phase encodes how the molecule's motion lines up across space. Where the phase changes rapidly, the air density fluctuates strongly, a loud sound. Where it changes gently, the sound is softer. Imagine someone playing a note on a violin. The string vibrates. That vibration sets the air nearby into motion. Tiny variations in pressure travel outward, forming waves. Your ear catches these waves, funnels them to the eardrum, and transforms them into nerve signals. From the holophase viewpoint, the entire chain, from string to air to ear to brain, can be seen as one continuous story of phi organizing itself as a wave. The note's pitch, how high or low it sounds, is related to how fast the pattern repeats in time. It's omega. The way the loud and quiet regions are spaced in the air relates to spatial pattern. It's k. The fact that music can travel around a corner, echo in a room, or be distorted by wind is all part of how phi's wave phrases are bent and scattered by their environment. Here too, falsifiability enters. If sound really is such a phase-governed wave, then two sounds at the same place and time should add in a specific way. Sometimes they reinforce, sometimes they cancel. This is interference. You can test it by playing the same tone from two speakers and walking through the room. You will find places where the sound is loud and places where it almost vanishes, purely because of how the underlying phase patterns align. From the holophase point of view, that cancellation is not magic. It is simply a place where phi coming from one path is exactly out of step with phi coming from another, so the net change is small. When you hear a beat pattern, that slow rising and falling of loudness when two slightly different tones are played together, you're hearing a simple mathematical fact about how two nearby omegas interact when written in the same phi language. As you listen now, perhaps there are several sounds blending around you. My voice, distant traffic, a fan, your own breathing. Each of these is a different phi phrase unfolding in the acoustic medium. Your brain's auditory system is a remarkable holophase reader. It separates these phrases, groups them, follows patterns over time, and turns them into meaning. With light and sound, we have already covered much of what we conventionally call waves. Holophase shows that both can be treated as different modes of the same underlying rhythmic language. But perhaps the most surprising part is this. Even the solid, quiet objects around you are, in this picture, written in phi. Look at something near you that feels stable. A chair, a book, your own hand. It does not rush past like light. It does not move back and forth like sound. It simply remains. Our everyday language says, this is matter, or this is a thing. Behind those words lies a very precise question. What holds this together? What makes this cluster of atoms stay roughly the same shape over time? In part 18 and part 21, we talked about knots in the phase, about defects in phi we called sigma. We imagined ropes with knots, whirlpools in water, rings of current. The key idea was that certain patterns of phi cannot be undone smoothly. They are topologically protected. They behave like sturdy nouns in the sentence of reality. Now, in daily life, many of the objects we see are made of huge numbers of such patterns layered together. An electron in one holophase reading is a very specific, stable twist in the underlying phase. So is a proton. An atom is a bond configuration of several such twists and the fields around them. A molecule is a more elaborate dance of these patterns locking together. A crystal, like salt or diamond, is an entire lattice of phase patterns repeating in space. Your chair, your table, your bones and tissues are all built from these nested, knotted, rhythmically stable configurations of phi. They are not static in the deep sense. At the microscopic level, everything is in motion. Electrons are exploring clouds of possibility. Nuclei vibrate. Lattice jiggle. But the overall phase grammar keeps the configuration within a certain family of shapes. To us, at our scale and with our limited resolution, this looks like solidity. If this picture is more than metaphor, it should have consequences. For instance, materials should have specific allowed vibrational modes, patterns of motion that fit their internal phase structure. We call these normal modes or phonons. They determine how the material carries heat, how it rings when struck, and how it interacts with light. Experiments confirm that solids do have such quantized vibrations, and that their properties can be predicted from an underlying wave-like description. From the holophase viewpoint, that is exactly what we expect. A solid is phi trapped in a particular long-lived composition. Its possible wiggles are limited by the local grammar encoded in its defects and bonds. When you tap a glass and hear its clear ring, you are listening to one of those allowed phrases of phi passing through the material. Now, let us come even closer to the most intimate phenomena we know, our own thoughts and perceptions. Up to now, it may have been easy to think of holophase as something happening out there, in light, in sound, in distant galaxies, or tiny particles. But the daring claim of the holophase language is that even your inner life, the flow of images, feelings, ideas, is grounded in the same phase code. This does not mean reducing your experience to just physics in a dismissive way. It means recognizing that whatever else consciousness may be, it rides on physical processes in the brain. Those processes, in turn, are patterns of ion flows, electrical oscillations, chemical gradients, all of which can be described, at least in principle, as patterns in fields, and therefore as patterns in phi. Think about the simplest building block of brain activity most people have heard of, the brainwave. When many neurons in a region become active in a coordinated rhythm, we can sometimes measure a repeating pattern of electrical potential on the scalp. We call these alpha waves, beta waves, gamma waves, and so on, depending on their frequency. They are not the whole story of thought, but they are a clear sign that the brain uses temporal structure, repeating rhythms, as part of its operation. In holophase language, these brainwaves are phi speaking in a deeply nested way. They are slower than light, much slower. They are bound to the geometry of the brain, which is incredibly complex. But at heart, there are still oscillations with an omega, still spatial patterns with a k, still subject to the same grammar of phase differences and wave interference. When two brain regions synchronize their rhythms, some scientists say they are communicating or binding information together. In our language, we might say, two parts of the holophase tree, far apart in space, have aligned their local ticking in such a way that patterns can pass more easily between them. The phase relationship between their oscillations matters. This is not mystical. It is precisely the kind of behavior you see when two pendulum clocks on the same wall fall into sync, or when musicians lock into a groove. Your perceptions, a face, a melody, a memory of childhood, would then be extremely complex phrases written in these nested, interlocked oscillations. The atoms in your brain are not fundamentally different from the atoms in a rock, but their patterns of activity are unimaginably more intricate. In everyday language, we say the brain is active. In holophase language, we would say in this warm, wet organ, phi has found a way to write self referential stories about itself. Can we test this? To some extent, yes. We can measure how changing the timing of neural activity affects perception and action. We can observe how certain types of oscillatory patterns correlate with conscious awareness, with sleep, with focused attention. Increasingly, scientists can even use precise pulses of light or magnetism to nudge those patterns and see how experience changes. All of this fits the general idea that the brain's function depends not just on which neurons fire, but on when they fire, on the phase relationships among their activity. Holophase does not claim to have solved the mystery of consciousness. What it does claim is that whatever the solution is, it will be made of patterns in phi. The same code that writes light and sound and solids is also the canvas for your inner world. So now, let us put all of this together in one unified picture. You are sitting perhaps in a room. Light touches your eyes, sound reaches your ears. The chair supports your body. Your thoughts wander as you listen. From the outside, this looks like a scene with many different kinds of things: photons, phonons, atoms, neurons, ideas. From the holophase point of view, it is one continuous phase field, phi, expressing itself in many dialects. Where phi vibrates extremely fast and cleanly, respecting a special relation between omega and k, you see light. Where phi guides coordinated compressions in air or in other media, you hear sound. Where phi has tied itself into stable knots and lattices, you feel solid matter. Where phi has built a deeply nested network of oscillations in your brain, you experience thoughts, feelings, and the sense of self. Everywhere, the same core elements of the language are at play: local values of phi, their changes in time and space, the resulting echoes in motion, the curvatures and topologies that give stability and structure. The master tree is not a diagram in a textbook. It is the living code of the scene you're in right now. And, just as we emphasized in part 23, none of this is beyond testing. Each branch of this story comes with specific, measurable claims. Light must diffract, interfere, and disperse in ways consistent with a phase grammar. Sound must show superposition, resonances, and group velocities that match the same logic. Solids must have vibrational spectra and transport properties that reflect underlying wave patterns. Brains must show timing-dependent behavior consistent with being a phase-driven network. What holophase offers is a way to talk about all of these phenomena in a single, coherent language, without pretending that our models are complete or that our measurements are infinite. It says, let us be modest in what we claim, but bold in how we connect. Before we finish, let us walk together through one simple, imagined moment and read it in holophase language. Picture yourself standing at a bus stop on a cool evening. Streetlights glow, cars pass by. A gentle breeze moves the leaves of a nearby tree. Somewhere, a dog barks. Your phone vibrates in your pocket. You glance at a message from a friend and feel a small smile rising. Freeze that moment. Now unfreeze it slowly and translate. First, the light. The orange street lamp above you, the white headlights, the bluish phone screen. Each is phi speaking in a different wave dialect. Different omegas, different spatial patterns, all obeying their own dispersion rules. Shadows on the pavement, reflections on windows, and halos in misty air are interference and scattering. Phi being bent, delayed, and recombined. Next, the sound. The hum of traffic is a thick chord of many phi waves in the air, overlapping and partly cancelling. The dog's bark is a sharp packet, a local burst of compression. Its faint echo of a nearby wall is Phi retracing its own story, the same pattern written again after bouncing back. Then, the solid world. The cold metal of the pole under your hand, the rough concrete beneath your feet, the smooth casing of your phone. Each material is a long, stable configuration of phase defects and bonds. Their stiffness and texture come from the allowed ways Phi can organize itself in those lattices. When you tap the pole and hear a dull ring, you are exciting one of its permitted Phi vibrations. Now, your own body. Your skin feels the chill air. Tiny sensors in your fingertips register pressure and texture. Those signals become nerve impulses, waves of electrical and chemical change traveling along fibers. In our language, each impulse is a moving wave of Phi expression in a narrow biological cable. Finally, your inner scene. You read the message. Memories light up. The face of your friend, previous talks, shared moments. A mood shifts inside you. From the inside, this is a story about meaning. From the holophase side, it is a particular pattern of activity across billions of neurons, coordinated in time and space, pulling on earlier patterns stored in modified connections. Holophase invites you to see these two descriptions as complementary, not competing. The meaning is what it feels like from the inside when Phi writes that complex story. The phase pattern is the side we can, at least in principle, probe with instruments and equations. If our tools become fine enough, we might one day watch how specific oscillations synchronize in your brain at the instant you get the joke in a message, or feel that small smile arrive. Using this language does not erase the richness of your experience. It roots that richness in a common physical code. Light, sound, matter, and mind are no longer separate kingdoms. They are different chapters written in the same script. So the next time you find yourself in a quiet, ordinary moment, waiting, walking, washing dishes, sitting in a cafe, you can, if you wish, flip a small internal switch. For a few breaths, look at the scene not as many disconnected objects, but as one continuous holophase, speaking around you and through you. Light as one kind of sentence, sound as another, solid objects as long, stable paragraphs, your thoughts as fast, self-editing notes in the margins. Sometimes, just this shift of view can soften the sense of separation. You are no longer a stranger dropped into a foreign universe. You are a phrase written in the same ink as everything else. And as you practice seeing like this, the master tree we have been drawing together stops being an abstract diagram and slowly turns into a living map of the everyday world you already inhabit. Before we close, I want to give you a small exercise you can carry into your everyday life, a kind of gentle practice of reading reality as Phi. The next time you are outside on a sunny day, look at the shadow of a tree on the ground. Notice how the edges of the shadow are not perfectly sharp. Between light and dark, there is a soft gradient, a fuzzy border. That fuzziness is a direct consequence of light being a wave. The holophase code is speaking in those blurred edges. You are seeing interference between many slightly different K values as light squeezes past the leaves. Later, listen to a favorite piece of music. As you follow the melody and rhythm, imagine the air as a sea of tiny phase arrows, all tilting back and forth together in complicated patterns. The drum beat, the bass line, the voice are each different wave phrases in the same sea. Your eardrums, bones, and neural circuits are decoding them, turning Phi patterns into meaning. Then touch something solid. The surface of a table, the cover of a book, your own arm. Feel its resistance. That firmness is a sign that the underlying phase knots are highly stable. To change them, you would need a lot of energy, enough to break the pattern and rewrite the code. Finally, sit quietly for a moment and watch a single thought arise in your mind. Maybe it is a memory. Maybe it is a worry. Maybe it is simply the awareness of your breath. From inside, it feels like a pure mental event. From the holophase point of view, it is also the unfolding of an extremely complex phase configuration in your brain. The content of the thought and the physical pattern are two faces of the same event. You do not need to believe in holophase to try this exercise. The point is not to force a metaphysics on your experience. The point is to give you a new lens through which to look. A lens we can keep checking against experiments, a lens that ties many domains together without demanding that you memorize equations. We began this episode with the promise that the language of reality might be one continuous code, written in the phases of a single field, phi. Step by step, we have built an alphabet, a grammar, and now, in part 24, we have started reading short essays written in that language in the world around us. In the next parts, we will go even further into information, memory, and meaning. We will ask what it means for the universe not only to have patterns, but to carry and process information through those patterns. For now, let this be enough. When you open your eyes, when you listen, when you touch, and when you think, you are already immersed in the holophase. You are not just an observer of the code, you are one of its most intricate sentences. Peace be upon you until the next part.